Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
You're in the right place for conversations about current needs that we as business leaders have and the things that we face every day, like technology changes, changing customer expectations, and changing marketplaces. Get the hint? Change. I think that was a repetitive word right in that previous sentence, because when we're embracing change, we are able to take what it means to reach our short-term goals and increase our confidence in our long-term position with ease and a clarity around the direction that we're going, all in the pre-planning. And this is program 208, Can We Automate Trust? And when we're thinking about automating trust, I'll bet a lot of you are like, right? What are you doing? Why? What could you say? How? We can never do that. And the thing is, Jeff, who's going to be talking with me today, and I will introduce you to him in just a moment, has a really interesting take on this. And I believe that he believes the same that you do. And he's putting different words and different thinking around it. And what are we trying to do here? We're trying to make better decisions. We're trying to lead more effectively. So this concept, can we automate trust? By the way, I think the answer is yes, we can. So to add fuel to that fire, Jeffry Caudle is founder of NeuroDash. He's a startup. And he is a critical thinker that looks for ways to improve workflows to reach our individual and our company's full potential. Jeff, we're so glad you're here today.
Thank you. It's
trying to think, can we add any other fuel to this fire? I mean, we got to get down to the coals to make s'mores, but we might as well burn bright first.
Yeah. I guess, when I think about the idea, as far as it's a big idea. I mean, it's a really big idea.
It's not even the stratosphere. It's here's our problems that we're facing every day, and what do we do, and how do we react, and how do we respond, and are we present? It's taking a step back and getting into that growth strategy and business, the strategic business plan. But then it's going out into the world, and I actually think what you're talking about is even at least one step, maybe two past that.
Yeah. I looked at how people understand leadership and how do they understand trust. And I was researching it, and the best definition that I found for leadership was leadership means to lead. And what that means is that a lot of people don't really understand what leadership is because the definitions are not clear at all. And so I started kind of thinking about how do we break that down as far as like trust and leadership and how is, like John C. Maxwell, he said, trust is the currency of leadership, right? So how do we make trust, why is trust integral to leadership, and what is trust?
Well, and then we've got to take it one step further. If leadership means to lead, people forget that. That means we have a responsibility to get results, and we have a responsibility to create an environment that people want to follow and join in, which means effective results, constant results, even if they're bad, being able to own them and learn from them so everybody grows together. Yeah, that uniform growth. And the thing is that what I found was that what leadership really is the leader determines what success looks like for the team. They're the ones who define success. Then the team puts together the objectives. You give your team autonomy. I was thinking about some of the process as far as like when I was designing the system, I saw the end of the system and then I worked backwards. But I think seeing your end goal and being transparent about it is really critical to building trust. And I thought about what the definition of trust is, and essentially it's assuming people's needs, not just asking them what their needs are, but looking ahead. Something like my grandfather taught me. I worked for him for a long time, and he mentored me, and that's where a lot of my design thinking and stuff came from. Is that he taught me that project management, that you're an employee when you master one part of the work.
But when you master seeing everything, that's project management, that's leadership. And so I've always sort of taken that away, where to see everything, you have to anticipate everyone's needs ahead of time and then see how all of that interacts with each other.
What did your grandpa do?
So he did construction, and he also did kind of like handyman work. We kind of did anything in proximity to construction, but he mostly did painting work and stuff specifically. But we would build decks, we would repair all sorts of stuff, and I did from 12 to 18.
That's amazing. And to be able to have that be a business for so long, I mean, it sounds like it spanned a long time, means this design thinking, being able to go, here's where we're at, here's where we want to go, and working backwards from that makes us adaptable. And you're bringing that into your startup, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is that what I wanted to do was I wanted to take away the barriers that people have to working with each other. So when I worked for BP, one of the things that I noticed was that their inventory was completely disorganized. And but not just that, but they were blaming people and the team was blaming each other for these mix-ups with a lot of the freight. And what I noticed was that the freight bins, their Eastern operations and their Western operations, were right next to each other. So here's a system thinking where they put the two bins next to each other thinking we're going to, speed that up. We're going to make that faster, right? But now they didn't take people into account, and people mix up locations and bins when they're right next to each other. So I said, why not put one side on one side of the warehouse and the other side on the other, because this is Eastern and this is Western. Make it uniform with the way people think intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
And then all that disappeared.
It did.
Went away. So I thought about how the system in which, like, how we do things is really like when we make mistakes, a lot of times it's not ourselves. It's the system, the underlying intuition behind the system that people get really messed up. And so leaders, they get really frustrated with their team, and their team gets frustrated with each other when it's really just a simple fix like that a lot of times. And so my thought was, let's take a framework that people can work with, and then they can kind of distribute that to their team.
So are there elements or systems that build up trust?
So there are many systems that build up trust. Like when I break down trust as far as like defining it in a general term, it's trust is simplicity, trust is clarity, trust is transparency, and it's proximity. So the biggest thing is that when we look at systems like an inventory system can tell you a lot about what's going on with your metrics. And if you share that with your team, then everybody can kind of figure out what needs to happen, right? But there's all kinds of ways to use technology to build trust. The way in which you correspond with people, the way in which we talk to people, like it's better to talk to people face to face or even Skype than email. Because email, there's a lot that gets lost in translation, particularly prioritization. That's the biggest challenge for companies right now, knowing what to prioritize. Because, again, leadership is defining success. But when the customer says that they want things a certain way, then the customer often leads a lot of the organization. So you run into this challenge of what are the needs of the customer? And then also, how do we translate that to a project? Translate and meet those needs, because it isn't always expectations. Expectations is a huge part of it. It's also that people aren't aware of what they need. That's the biggest challenge I think that faces companies.
So in our effort to be more, to be able to prioritize more, we think we need more time to think. So we use all this technology, and when we're using all of this technology, we butt up against all kinds of things. And you mentioned one of them earlier in your example of the simplicity that's in place, which, by the way, one of my personal values is elegance. And the way that you described trust are all elements within my personal value of elegance, because we're talking about grace, but we're also talking about that straightforwardness with class and tact to the best of our ability. And we think technology is great because it cuts through all kinds of stuff and we get to reduce confusion between people. Well, if we lack clarity and we're not straightforward and it isn't simple and we're taking a complex process and just putting technology around a complex process instead of using technology to make a simpler process, we're compounding the problem, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that technology is there to make people happy. Like Teddy Roosevelt, he said that laws were made to serve people. People were not made to serve laws, right? And we talk about a bureaucracy. What is a bureaucracy? It's when people are serving the system, the processes, and the processes aren't serving the people. And that works with companies too. I mean, we need to change the way we think about it in terms of not just being systems thinking, but also intuitive, and looking at how do these systems play a part in people's happiness? Because a lot of times companies, they look at the bottom line, which is, there's a question of if they can increase their profits by 80%, but their employees' engagement is down by 60%, right? Which they have metrics for in Gallup polls. 64% of employees are disengaged, which means that, and when I think of disengagement, I think about when I first started working in the mainstream world, because I went from working for my grandfather to working for, retail. I noticed a huge difference where it was like, it was kind of like the expectations were never clear, and sometimes the expectations were not obtainable. And those two factors, setting obtainable goals, is really critical, and making sure that the framework that people are operating under, like a lot of times, it's really easy to just blame the person and to start with that, but we need to look at what is the underlying system, what is the underlying problem. And I had taken that philosophy and I thought about it, and so I ended up volunteering and then working as a peer specialist in the mental health field. I took this systems thinking into the mental health system, and I noticed that I never considered myself like a super, an F, a feeling person, but I took this systems thinking with people, and I said, okay, let's look at your life. Let's look at, let's just kind of problem solve this. And I noticed that most of the problems that people had, it was just the way they were going about their day. A lot of times it was how they were setting their goals, breaking those goals down. And I would ask them, what is the smallest thing you can do to work towards your goal? No matter how big your goal is, what is the smallest thing you can do today? And then what is the smallest thing you can do next week? And when you start small, you run into this thing of you build a habit around it. And this is the thing that we need to look at when we look at systems. They are what build our habits. So that's the biggest thing that I think that we have to, when we look at and defining what a system is that supports us, it's a system that supports our habits and helps build strong habits.
Which means if we're in an organization and there's kind of like this, I don't know if you want to call them the squeaky wheel or the one that's weighting everybody else down. It seems what I hear you saying is that could be very well what they're doing. Could very well be that they are the anchor. It could very well be that is toxic. Before that decision is made that they are actually toxic, though, it sounds like an evaluation of how they do their work and their workflow compared to what they think the expectation has been given to them, right? Is the clarity that was given to them actually clearly received? And then on top of that, being able to say, and does the technology help these people, or is it actually getting in their way?
Yeah. And the other thing that I look at when I describe proximity is one of the biggest aspects of trust. And what that means is that proximity can apply to people and it applies to solutions. So the best way to think about proximity is that is the solution adjacent to you? Like, it shouldn't be 12 steps to get to the goal. It needs to be 1 step, 2 steps to accomplishing this goal. And so when we talk about breaking down a goal and setting our objectives, we need to make sure that we're reducing the number of steps so that the goal is as clear as day. And that's part of what simplicity is about. And that's part of what transparency is about. So they all kind of work into each other. But the way I see it is that we're all system designers. The way we interact with each other, the way we see what other people are doing and what we take in and the way we understand things. We have to kind of look at our role in this bigger picture, because it's not just us now. There's a lot of contractors and a lot of different complexity is increasing
Mm-hmm.
as we go along. And so bringing that simplicity back to teams is really critical as I see it.
Well, and now we're even more spread out. I mean, think about unless we're in an office. I mean, all of Red Direction's team is remote. I'm the only one in Colorado, let alone Boulder, Colorado. And so the way that we communicate and what the expectations are different than when we're in person. Yet there are similarities in both cases, right? The touch point of just regular check-ins, the touch point of, if you're not using the technology that we have set up to keep track of all of these things, how come? If we are having a consistent problem and, if we're getting a consistent result we don't like, and so we might call that a problem, where do we look? Do we look at the communication breakdown? Of course. Most people stop there. When we're talking remote teams and we're talking about building relationships between us and our customers, actually, when we're service industries, the same principles apply to having a remote team and working remotely from the rest of your team, in that the way we communicate and that simplicity must be talked about more, almost to the point of over communicating, just because when we rely on email or we rely on technology or we rely on text, it's so much the norm that we take a whole bunch of stuff for granted, and we're actually working against how our brain is wired, because it's great that our brain wants us to help get shortcuts and be able to save time and do more with our time. But it's not great that those shortcuts interfere with the relationships.
Yeah. The other thing that I found is that people tend to understand things more visually than verbally. You can see that in, like, if you ever played the game Telephone, for example, you have a group of people, one person passes the message, they each go through each other, and by the end point, it's not the same thing. And that's what happens in teams all the time. So what I had found was that if you created transparency, you build trust. And the way to build transparency is through visual representations of data, by having actual charts, actual graphs that every team can see and access. And you only put the most critical information in front of people, what they need, understanding those core needs. And to break that down, it's not always easy. But again, that's why systems and the way we communicate is so critical, because I believe that, for example, like if you're decentralized and you're working with a decentralized team, you have to kind of try to have a visual interaction of some kind. So like a video call, if you're going to do a video call, you need to kind of not rely so heavy on email, because email can slow people down in trying to interpret what's going on and interpret what you mean. So, because a lot of times you'll get emails and they'll say, if you have any questions, please contact me. And then you contact them, and then it's like 24 hours. And that's with every single email out there, So
True.
It's a matter of transparency as I see it.
I like how you're defining transparency. So I'm just going to put that out there. Most people think transparency means bare your soul, have no secrets. And really, it just means don't have any motives behind your actions, or state whatever your motives are so your actions make sense.
State the information and share what you know, as far as everything that they need to know, as far as what is critical to them accomplishing their goal. And it's important, though, to not state more than that, though, because a lot of times this is where simplicity comes into play, is that you have to reduce the amount of information that you're giving people down to bite-sized ways. And so if the objectives that you set require so much information that it overwhelms people, you have to pay attention to that. Because a lot of times when people get overwhelmed, they won't admit that they're overwhelmed. But if you build small successes with your team, that's the most critical element as I see it.
You join in the conversation, dear business owners, dear business leaders, dear entrepreneurs out there, because it's when we are having this conversation together about, can we automate trust, program 208 of the Voice of Bold Business Radio, that's how we keep building on these ideas and decide what leading means today. Don't forget to use hashtag VBB Radio We'll be right back.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
You're listening to program 208. Can we automate trust? And I'm Jess Dewell, growth entrepreneur. And today, talking with me is Jeffry Caudle, technology startup founder and design thinker and critical thinker. And the first part of the program has been about elements of trust and using systems to build trust instead of get in the way. To understand that when there's a problem, it could be a people problem. And a lot of time, people problems sit on top of a deeper issue. And what Jeff has been sharing with us is that deeper issue is the way and how we're using technology in spite of the fact of the way our brains are wired. And so with that setup and that recap from the first half, Jeff, I know there are problems that businesses are facing today that relate to this, but what are the exact problems that show up because of the convolutedness of some of what we're talking about here, trust and automation and technology?
Okay, so right now, every business has a problem of growth, where they want to grow and they want to decentralize and they want to expand, but they can't expand because they have trouble knowing where their people are, what their people are doing, communicating those goals, right? So there's a huge amount of barriers for a company to expand right now, but we're in a technological age where we can expand horizontally without kind of increasing real estate, without increasing costs. So where technology can actually really help us is with the decentralization of your company. If you can deliver services to your customer, if you can deliver solutions to your customer, that puts you in closer proximity to your customer. That allows you to be transparent with your customer and clear. Because these goals, as far as simplicity, clarity, transparency, and proximity, they apply to your customer as well. And we as customers, we pick people we trust. And when your customer trusts you, a lot of ways, if you look at when you look at people that really trust a company, it's almost like love. Like they will stay with them forever, no matter what happens. You look at Apple and their customers, they call them fanboys or whatever. But the thing is, they fell in love with the idea of the iPhone because it was such an innovation, but there was a bigger part of it, which is a meta need that nobody really realized that they needed, because they needed a system that was simpler, that didn't have all the buttons and all the widgets and things like that. So a lot of it is about kind of also meeting your customer and meeting the needs of your customer, going out and working directly with them. But to do that, people need to be able to check in, and their work needs to be tracked in such a way that the team sees what's going on.
You mean like ask them what their growth goals are?
Yeah, the growth goals are critical because it's about prioritization. The team has to know what the priorities are.
So, and that's the thing. It's really interesting because that's something that I also talk about a lot. I'm like, when was the last time you asked your people, what are their growth goals? When was the last time you asked your key customers, what are your growth goals? When did you ask your customers, what is the thing you're trying to solve, and how does what we're doing actually help you get it solved? And we avoid those questions. I'm curious, based off of all this design thinking and everything else, do you have a theory or a hypothesis or any tips on why that happens?
As far as, so.
Not asking, we're doing, we're prioritizing, yet in the grand scheme of things, we forget to just check in with the people who are helping us get the thing done, build the thing.
So the biggest thing is that trust has to be extended to people first. You have to extend trust to your employee unconditionally. I believe that some of the therapeutic tactics like Carl Rogers, unconditional positive regard, that employers and leaders have to kind of instill that. But they also need to understand that their people are learning, and they need to help people grow in such a way that communication is established, so that people know they can fail. And it's not just absolute failure. It's the idea that that communication can fail, that they can misunderstand something, and that's okay. That they can feel overwhelmed, and that's okay. That you're not going to, and this is why it's so critical to blame the system first, because when people feel like they're being blamed, they get really defensive, and they worry about talking about what they have trouble with. Part of it is it's always about making people feel comfortable to talk to you, and that's, you have the elements of the business, but the elements of the business are all dependent upon the people, and it's something that we can't forget when we're working with people, because ultimately it doesn't matter if you hire the best talent. You look at like the Broncos, the Denver Broncos, they replaced their quarterback, and they didn't have their team together, and they've just been having awful seasons ever since. But they brought in these amazing quarterbacks, and suddenly they're doing awful in the team. And the thing is that when a team operates, it has to kind of operate the same way you see it in football, where every person has to know what they're doing and the play that's going on. And you need your team to be able to make decisions rapidly. So they need to understand the objectives. They need to know as much as you do about the situation. And a lot of times people think that leadership is having all the information. It's not. It's distributing the information. It's sharing it.
And more importantly than that, asking for it back. I mean, not only not having the answers, definitely sharing, but also saying, hey, I don't have all the answers. What answers do you have? Let's piece this together ourselves. Let's figure out, and I call that dimensional leadership, because we tend to think we want to work in a vacuum. We think we need to. We've been conditioned that the higher up we are, the more alone we are, because we're supposed to have all the answers. And then what happens when we don't? We have heart condition and back pain and failure and obesity and all kinds of other outcomes of stress. And so when we've got technologies, are you saying that there's I'm not even going to ask, are you saying, where is the line between when is technology good and when does technology get in the way? Is there a pivot point that we could look for within our organizations to kind of find out, do we have a deeper problem and we haven't found the root yet of some of our growth issues?
Yeah, so technology gets in the way when it blinds you, when whatever you put in front of you is your attention. So the thing is that the more technology you implement, you have to keep in mind that is something you have to ask yourself, take a minimalist approach. When you look at interface design, it takes away everything. The reason why I believe Google was successful as a search engine, it wasn't the algorithm. People didn't care about that. It was the fact that when they went to the main screen, all it said was a search bar. We forget that because if you remember Yahoo, they had all these links, this news, all these flashing things. In the early 90s, they thought more links, more technology, more widgets, more gadgets. MySpace did that, but that's why they failed. And people, they only want 1 to 3 things in front of them at a time. And it's really critical to remember that people are not multitaskers, they're unitaskers. And so when we put technology in front of people, we have to be taking away other things. And I believe that technology, every improvement should remove steps. It should remove other systems that you have to use. I mean, so when we designed our system, we tried to, we looked at all these different systems that people were using, all these different things. And we thought, what if we could bundle that all into one system and remove everything that people didn't need? And we actually we originally weren't trying to make an automation system. What we found was that when you implement simplicity, clarity, transparency, and proximity, you actually create an automation system just by default. It's a really weird thing, but that's just what happens. When you reduce steps, you get automation, and you get kind of a system where everybody flows together.
Okay, so how did then, because here's what I wrote down as you were talking about this, is something we will cover because it's going to be on people's mind as soon as you say automate. Reduce tasks and automate. People get fearful of that. Well, I'm no longer valid. Well, I'm this or I'm that. So when we use technology to remove steps, what in fact are we adding? Because I heard you say earlier, we're adding and we're taking away. We're adding and we're taking away. So if we're going to take away, how do we add to that role to get it, maintain fulfillment and usefulness?
So here's the cool part, right? So machines were meant to create certainty. They were meant to, so anything that centers around certainty, it can be automated, right? But where people shine is when there's uncertainty, when it's problem solving, when it's working together, when it's setting the objectives. A software system, AI is dumb. It can't set its own objectives. We need people to figure out what are the objectives and to move things from uncertainty to certainty. And as soon as you cross that barrier where you have a solution, you know what needs to be done, and it's just routine, automate it. Get people out of that disengagement. And one of the things that I've been noticing is this weird trend where we're trying to make people into machines, and we're trying to make machines into people. We're trying to have machines do what people can do, and we're having the robocalls and stuff like that. But if you free up your people, then they can call the customer personally. And all those communication things that apply to your team, it applies to your customer. Your customer is a team member in your business. They are helping setting the objectives. They work with them. Employ your customer and see them as a part of your company, because it's so critical in the way that we use technology that we never forget the people element.
And it's great to hear you see this, which is why I agree. We can automate trust. We can take care of the things that are routine, that are mundane, that we have figured out how to build a process for, and technology has caught up, so we don't have to do those tasks, which means we can collaborate more, which means we can have more time for creative thinking, which means we get to actually evaluate more what our contribution is besides checking boxes and how much of something we're doing, and what is the value add by the way we're getting those boxes checked and the way we're influencing what we've already automated, right?
Yeah, the best way to think about it, I get fascinated by different things every now and then, and one of the things that I was interested in this year was actually gardening, and it sounds weird, but
no, it's cool.
So they talk about the Pareto principle, that they found that the Pareto, I forget his first name, but Pareto, he was looking at his gardening, noticed that about 20% of his crops were responsible for 80% of the yield. And so, and this applies in mathematics, it applies in Bayesian theories and economics, and it has this huge implication. But if you go back to the garden, to the tree, right? When you prune your tree, and they found that in 3 branches, if you can prune a fruit tree down to 3 branches, it actually produces tons more fruit than if you try to just let it grow. And companies, they try to this uncontrolled growth of everything from their tools, their resources, to their people, that they no longer can see what's important, and they no longer can actually expand things. And it's really important. I thought about the pruning thing, and I thought it's all about pulling back everything so that you know what is important, so that you have one thing in front of you at a time.
And we all try to multitask. And I will tell you, I was in a conversation this morning, and it was a long conversation. It was a 90-minute video call. And in there, we were so into one particular part of the conversation, all of a sudden I felt full. And I was like, I can't process anymore. I can't take anything else in. I can't anything. But we're in the middle of this call and we have a lot of work to do. So I spoke up and I said, we're going to go back to this other part of the conversation, and we're going to look at this a different way. My brain needs to process that. My brain needs to absorb that. So I needed to put my active focus someplace else so my subconscious would have a place to work, because that's, well, 1, it's I know how I work. 2, it's when we work on something for too long, we start to get in our own way a little bit, and we think we ought to know, and frustration creeps in and anger creeps in, yet it doesn't have to. And so some of what you're talking about also is just a way to move quickly from task to task in a way that we can see results, yet and then when we come back to it, it seems easy. It's like, well, why did I get stuck there? Well, because we didn't give ourselves a little bit of space, right?
Yeah, there was a business instructor, and I'm sorry I forget his name, but he was talking about how sometimes when we set these goals, we have to remember that there isn't always an answer, and if we can't find the solution, there may not be a solution, and so sometimes you have to kind of look at it. And because I was thinking about, like, for me, I like to break things down, all these complex ideas. And I like to break them down to the core elements. It's and try to use kind of a formula for it. But there isn't a formula. Sometimes things are not always clear, and you have to work with ambiguity more often than not as a team. And that's always the challenge, is working with ambiguity, trying to find a way to build certainty, but recognizing that ambiguity is a part of the process, and it's a really important part.
Truth. And then there are questions we're never going to answer. And I'm thinking about some of the ones that, get focused on all the time is, how do we anticipate changing customer expectations? There is no tried and true process for that, because technology changes so fast, because the way we engage with our technology is changing so fast, because of our acceptance or resistance to change around us happens. All of those are impacts, and we're the economic factors. We will never know we will never anticipate 100% how our customers are going to change, what they want, what their expectations will become. All we can do is head in the direction.
So there's
like mining for gold, I guess.
There's actually a trick to this that Netflix found. It's called chaos engineering, and it's something that I've always been interested in, which is it's essentially where you look at what could go wrong, and you assume whatever could go wrong will go wrong. And this is one of the biggest advantages of automation, is that you can control your schedule in such a way that you provide slack. And the idea is that you assume that these things will go wrong, these delays will happen. And an example would be like traffic. So you wake up, you think that your trip should take 30 minutes, but then you get stuck in traffic and you're so angry, right? But part of that may be that maybe you need to leave an hour ahead of time, right? And the idea is that chaos engineering is assuming that if it happened before, or if it could happen, it will happen. And if you never want this to happen, then assume that it will, and prepare as it will, and allow yourself that time. And the idea is to put your slowdowns ahead of time, rather than when you need things the most. It's a critical element of when we make these lean processes, that we also allow for slack, because they found this in also the medical field. They found that when they left one emergency room open, it gave surgeons that slack that they needed, where if it was a priority, they could occupy that room. So they found that when they leave one assembly line down in every system, that teams work more efficiently. Having that room for failure and that room for delays is critical. It's absolutely necessary. But what Netflix did was they created something called chaos monkeys. It's a code where they would put rogue software in the system to create downs on their servers. So they literally were attacking their own servers as a means to prepare themselves for denial of service attacks. So it's kind of crazy, but it actually prevents I've never seen Netflix down. I mean, so far.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest reasons.
Or slow, for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, even on poor, slow internet connections, they don't seem to be slow. So you're right. Okay. Now this is really interesting, because you're saying build in time. And I'm thinking about all the small businesses that we work with, right? You and I, we both work with small businesses in different ways. And they don't know how to figure out how to build in that time. They're like, well, I'll just double my time estimate, which means you've got to double your rate. Otherwise your rate seems really low. And so you want to under promise and over deliver, right? All of these things that people do and how they want to show up help them look professional, yet are really, they're half-baked. They're half-baked all the way up the ladder. And when it starts as one or two people and it's half-baked, those expand and we get bulk and bloat and all kinds of things. And then we still can't quantify. And this is one of the things where I think AI and technology can help, because if you don't know, test on somebody and say, we just don't know how long this is going to take. We want to break it 3 times while we're doing it, and why not be transparent about it if we're trying to change a process? Because how else would you, I'm going to say, iteratively innovate?
So when I designed the system, we built 3 systems, and I designed it 3 different ways. When you're a startup, you have no idea how to validate a product. You have no idea what people need, and so I created 3 different business models, 3 different systems, and we prototyped it. And you prototype it rapidly. That's where you build it as fast as it comes to mind. And you break it down to these 3, you try to break down all of your ideas, you take a brainstorming session and you take, okay, what are the best of these? And you create 3 ideas that you love, 3 systems that you love, and 3 solutions, or maybe 3 solutions your customer loves. And when you give your customer options, and when you give your people options, and when you give yourself options, right, then you know that this was the best. And so what I did was I created a personal management system for people. I created a EHR for health record, as a health record system for doctors and for the medical care. And I created a business management system. And so I looked at these 3, then I got feedback, and I talked to people, and I found out that from a healthcare specialist that companies are subsidized with the pharmaceutical industry. And so they get their EHRs from the pharmaceutical industries. And there's a lot of startups trying to do that, but they don't realize that extra information. And then I found out with the personal health record system that most people won't listen to a schedule. They don't like things that tell them what to do. Turns out, go figure. And then I found with businesses, they had this problem where they want to expand. People want to start a business. What stops them? Well, the costs. Like, there are so many costs for a small business that they don't even realize. And so my thought was, what if people could start a business part-time where they can work, somewhere. They can work for Intel or whoever they want to do, or whoever they want to work with. And so the idea was that they could start their own business, and they could be more than just one thing, more than just a tech specialist. They could do gardening. My Uber driver, for example, I found out he was a industrial engineer. But this is the beauty of where we're going, is that when we save time, we allow ourselves to be more than just one thing. And what they found is that every successful artist, every successful business, almost all of them played the violin. Almost all of them were musicians. The greatest thinkers, the greatest mathematicians were all Renaissance people. And so when we think of good people, when we think of good systems, we want things that allow us to be better than just what we imagine, but we want to almost be better than what we ever thought we could be. And so we need the time to be able to figure that out, to figure out who we are. And so I think about, business, and I think that a lot of it is about figuring out how you can be useful to society and how you can do more with what you've got. So I think technology plays a huge role in that. And one of the things that I think about is the future, and I'm really excited about where things are going. Everybody kind of paints this dystopian future, but I see so many possibilities with it, as far as we can now, be more than just, a single occupation. We can have, the passion career with the standard other career that we want, something that pays the bills and something that we just love doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
what makes it bold to build in automation and trust into your growth strategy?
To adopt anything new, it's terrifying. It's terrifying because it makes you feel stupid. I mean, I'll just say that every new technology you adopt, every user interface, it makes you feel dumb. To learn anything new, you will feel dumb. And to work past that, you have to be willing to accept that is part of the process. And if you're willing to be dumb, if you're willing to ask the questions, you'll find that is when the best of you shines. And that's where boldness really comes from, is this sort of, and other people will tell you that you're dumb when you try to adopt something. Other people will be like, yes. Where are you getting it? You need to be faster at this. They'll criticize you. But if you take your time, you slow it down, you'll learn it better than anyone else around you, and you'll understand more of it. So I think, the willingness to be dumb, the willingness to embrace ignorance as a process, as a way of life. I think about it as being the student. Always trying to be the student is how you learn, is how you adopt new technology and new ideas. And I think we all want to be the master, but the student is the one who learns. So I don't know, that to me is the boldest and the strongest thing that anybody can do. So
you're going to find all the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P208. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 208. And you can also search the site for Can We Automate Trust? This is a time where you join in this conversation. Use hashtag VBB Radio. Send us an email, radio@reddirection. And more importantly, you're listening to this program wherever you're listening, iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube. Leave us a review. Give us a comment about what you thought about what this program does and how it will help you with your growth strategy. It's our stories that we're sharing together through our larger conversation that allow us to take other people's experiences and apply them without us having that own experience. And here you go. What can you do today to leverage time and automate trust?
The voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. When you aren't seeing the growth results you want, it's time to get an outside perspective. To discuss your specific situation around growth strategy, work with us. Visit voiceofboldbusiness.com and click Find Out More. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.